Welcome to Wired AF. I'm Brandon. I'm a nutritionist and the head coach at Accardi Fitness. I'm joined by Steph.
I'm Steph. I'm an osteopath and a Pilates instructor.
Took us so long to do the intro today, so hopefully you guys enjoy this episode.
Long. So today we're going to be talking about plant-based diets. This is an area that I think is quite popular at the moment. People are really into vegetarian, vegan, plant-based diets. So I guess we just sort of want to talk about what the difference is between them all. I've been vegetarian, I've been vegan, I've been plant-based. I would probably be a pescatarian now, perhaps, if we're going to give it a label. I try not to label how I eat now, but
we'll talk about what pescatarian is later.
Yep, we will. We'll give you guys definitions. But people like to fall into these labels and these groups of what they like to eat. And I guess we just want to make sure you guys understand what each of those things are, and also like the benefits and limitations of why people choose to follow these diets from a health and wellbeing perspective.
And a lot of my clients have come to me in the past wanting to do this kind of diet, mainly for the focus on trying to lose weight and thinking that a plant-based diet is going to help them lose weight, where the main focus and something that I always try to explain to them is, well, it comes down to what kind of foods are they eating anyway, and then how many calories are they going to be consuming, because ultimately there's not like a magic food that's going to make you lose weight. If you were to only eat vegetables, then it's very likely you would lose weight, but not because you're eating vegetables, just because your vegetables don't have a lot of calories. So you're probably just going to lose weight from not eating a lot of calories. But it's not the plant-based diet that actually made you lose the weight, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of people go wrong, and where the media definitely misleads people down the path of vegetarian and vegan diets. But there's definitely a lot of positive things that come out of vegetarian and vegan diets that people can definitely implement. And there's also, like anything, there are some drawbacks or some areas that people can, if they're not prepared, struggle with.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the first thing we'll get into is our definitions. So the first definition we've got here is pescatarian. So a pescatarian is a person who doesn't eat meat, but they will eat seafood. So this means that they won't eat chicken, beef, pork, or any land animals, but they'll still eat fish and seafood. Usually these people also will still eat eggs and dairy as well.
Perfect. That's something that Steph's working on at the moment. So just implementing a little bit of seafood here and there, but not necessarily being super strict in terms of how much meat you consume. Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
What's the next one?
The next one is vegetarian. So a vegetarian is a person who doesn't eat any meat or fish, but usually they'll still eat dairy and eggs. There are kind of subcategories here of a vegetarian. There are some vegetarians who don't have milk or dairy, and then there are others who don't have eggs. I think that's more just a personal preference. But yeah, typically a vegetarian will just not have any meat, but eggs and dairy are still a go.
And then we have vegan diet,
Yes.
which is a little bit similar to vegetarian, except it just excludes all the animal products. So mainly focusing on anything that's been all plant-based items, but no animal products. So that includes honey as well. So people who don't know, honey is obviously made from bees. So then honey is considered
an animal product, basically.
Yeah, an animal product, exactly. So vegans don't have that. And
even in something like lollies as well, there's gelatin, so they won't have lollies because there's gelatin in the lollies, and gelatin comes from cows.
Yeah.
So like simple things that you may not think of, vegans will just be a little bit stricter in terms of not having any animal product at all in their food. So no meat, no eggs, no dairy, and then nothing in any of their food that has animal products from it.
Perfect. And then plant-based.
So plant-based is it's I guess a little bit vaguer. It's saying that you mostly eat plants, but it allows the consumption of animal products still. So you're kind of, I guess, mostly having grains, cereals, legumes, vegetables, fruits, things from the earth, nuts and seeds, things that come naturally from the earth, but then you are still having things like eggs, dairy, and animal products if you want to, or if you feel like you need to. So I guess that's the difference there, is you're mostly getting your calories from those natural sources, plant-based sources. But yeah, you still do allow yourself those other things as well on occasion. And
I think that's where a lot of the population generally would fall into. People would most likely be plant-based, or a lot of people would be plant-based without realising. They probably have meat.
I don't know about the general population.
Well, they have meat probably one to twice a week at home.
You reckon?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
I think a lot of people have meat at every meal. Oh yeah, because you eat meat at every meal, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But I think people typically like to do that meat and 3 veg for dinner. That's like your kind of traditional Aussie or English meal, perhaps, that maybe, I don't know, but that's just our assumptions. I guess we don't know what everyone eats.
I see definitely have meat maybe, 2 to 3 times a week. I don't like say for a dinner. I think the clients that I've worked with in the past, because of them wanting to be more or focus on a plant-based diet, they definitely have implemented things that they've learned, or meals that they've cooked and meals that they've enjoyed into those things. Yeah. So that works really well for them. But that's just, I guess, my sample population is quite skewed compared to obviously the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's all good. So I guess some of the benefits and limitations, we're not doing this in any particular order, but there are some really great things about following any of these diets, whether they're plant-based, vegetarian, vegan, or pescatarian. So there's some really great benefits, but of course there's some limitations as well. So there's some things that I guess you might be lacking if you are following these diets, or it might even be a little bit restrictive for some people and may not be beneficial for some people.
The first thing we want to talk about is obviously the food labels, and people that look at the food and try and, I guess, label themselves as following a particular diet rather than just calling themselves, or rather just identifying that as how they eat. And then I guess if you're in a position where I've seen some clients before where they're doing a vegetarian diet just purely because they want to lose weight, but then they feel bad if they eat meat, or they kind of like feel bad if they cheat on their diet by adding things that they said they wouldn't add into, where if they're comfortable with it before, there's no real harm in them doing it. So there's that area where they can be quite restrictive in terms of the foods that they're going to be eating, so it can make it for an issue down the track with kind of how they look at food and what they're allowing themselves to eat. I've seen in the past where people are already allergic to things like nuts and eggs, so then naturally it's quite easy for them to be on a vegan diet because they feel like they're already limited with the options that they have. Whether or not that's appropriate, that's for them to decide, but then I'll work with them to make sure that they're getting adequate protein intake from other things like beans and legumes. So that works quite well anyway, and there can still be some really good health outcomes from it. The other thing that we see is people that come to us who want to do a vegan or a vegetarian based diet or a plant-based diet. People often don't know where to start with preparing food that comes without meat, or food that isn't centered around meat as the main proportion or main portion of protein, and then having just as we spoke before, that meat and 3 veg kind of thing, where people kind of own that mindset of this is what your meal's meant to look like, and they can't really think outside the box and understand that, well, no, you can have things like a lentil dal, or you can have baked beans, or like you can make your own baked beans, or you can have your own salsas and stir fries that aren't that have tofu in them, that aren't just centered around meat as well. So in that sense, it can make people really good in the kitchen and can make them work on their cooking skills, which then helps them in the long term if they were to change to a meat diet, if they were to add meat into their diet, and then they have some really good cooking skills that they can implement.
Yeah, I think people it can go 2 ways. So there's people who like to cook and will explore different options and will actually experiment quite well with different ways to cook food, such as with lentils and beans and just with grains and vegetables in general. So it can go that way. Or it can go the opposite way, where people tend to buy the pre-packaged vegetarian or vegan options. So like the veggie burgers, or the convenient chicken schnitzels, or in the freezer section.
Fake meat as well.
Yeah, they get the fake meat. And I think that's kind of the easy way into it, but it's also very expensive. So that's the other problem, is that, if you're cooking your own meals, yes, it's a bit more time. It takes a bit more time to prepare the meals, and you got to find the recipes, and you got to practice, and you got to learn how to cook, basically. But will be cheaper if you do it that way. Whereas if you rely solely on those vegetarian pre-packaged options or replacements, it's basically a meat replacement. Then you're going to find that it's going to add up very quickly, and it's actually going to become more expensive if you're following vegetarian or vegan diets that way. So I think, it can go 2 ways for people. I spoke to someone the other day actually about this, and she went vegan and her partner went vegan maybe 8 months ago, and I lent them my cookbook, my vegan cookbook, and it's an awesome cookbook, really easy to use, really simple recipes, and it's really cheap to get the ingredients for everything. It's basically just like lots of lentils and veggies and rice, right? And I don't think she used it because she was telling me how expensive it is to buy all the replacement meats for her and her partner. And I was like, what are you getting?
Its whole purpose.
And she's like, I'm getting the pre-cooked fake chicken schnitzels. And I was like, okay, they're like $8 a packet for 2 of them. Of course it's costing you an arm and leg. Yeah. Whereas if you're buying a packet of rice, Like, come on, you gotta think about these things. It's great to have those replacements as a quick and easy alternative every so often. Like, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I do that too. It's really convenient sometimes to have, veggie burgers or just something easy that you can do when you don't feel like making something. But I think if you rely solely on that, you are kind of missing out on that cooking experience, and it's going to cost more.
Yeah, so as Steph mentioned, one thing's the cost of the actual thing, but then the other thing is adherence to the diet itself. So if your goal is to lose weight, or your goal is to, stick to the diet or stick to a particular way of eating, if you're not cooking or putting the time into meal preparation or investing in buying the ingredients, often I find people aren't successful at adhering to it at all. So I find that with all the clients that I've worked with, when they get to a point where they're like, oh, I really want to learn how to cook, or I really want to improve how I'm cooking, or I really want to put time into cooking, preparing my meals, that's when I find they make the best progress, just from what I've seen. So I find if you can get clients that are like, oh, can you show me a recipe book, or can you send me a few recipes that I can work on, or if it's in nutrition coaching and people want to work on that, then that's something that they'll definitely stick to and they'll work on, and they're most likely to want to continue with it and then get the results that they want to. People that, if you're going to do, not saying this is bad, but if you're going to do, say you choose the vegan option on Uber Eats every night, that's not going to make you it's not necessarily going to make you lose weight just because you chose the vegan option. I think that's where people are kind of misled, and it's more about the amount of calories you're consuming, what's the quality of food they're consuming, and that you can control for when you're at home, and can be a lot easier to manage, so that you can actually have those, so you can actually work towards those goals that you're trying to achieve. Yeah,
and it's also easier to hit a nutrient target. So another problem, it's not like we're trying to go into a lot of problems with these diets. There are benefits, of course, as well, but another problem with these is that sometimes people don't hit enough or get enough nutrients of certain nutrient groups. So there's a big one with protein. It's often hard to get enough protein unless you're having, legumes, or tofu is a really great source as well. Nuts is another one too. Lots of veggies and grains also have protein,
and
just
even
not
if you're
in high amounts.
Even if you're vegetarian, having eggs and having milk and stuff like that, and some dairy products is going to be more than enough to get your protein intake. People often find that, or people often say to me, oh, they're not having enough protein, they'll have over way more than what they need to be, and it's really easy to get. I find it's really easy to get
if you know how to get it.
Yeah, and honestly, it's not rocket science. They're, like Steph mentioned, nuts, dairy products, and then eggs, and then there's beans and legumes. They're all going to contain, and lentils, they're all going to contain high amounts of protein per gram, and that's what Steph was talking about, where she was talking about nutrient quality. So that's about, per gram of food you're having, how many nutrients, or does it have a good quality of macro and micronutrients in that gram of food. So that's the difference between choosing those prepackaged things and choosing something that's real food, or even more, more of a raw ingredient.
Exactly. Like if you're eating real food, you're actually going to be able to get those nutrients a lot more easily. Another one that people struggle with is iron, and also vitamin B12 is another one for those that are on vegan diets, because those particular nutrients don't come in as higher quantities in non-meat products. You can still get them and find them, but it's just a little bit more difficult. So you just have to pay a bit more attention, I think, to the food that you're eating. You can't just replace it with, your packet stuff, because you're not going to have as much success. So I guess that's the point we're trying to get across there.
Yeah, with iron and stuff like that, often you'll see the things like lentils has more protein than steak and stuff like that, and it's interesting because for the amount of steak that you'd have to eat is only quite a small amount to get that same amount of protein from lentils, but lentils might be higher in protein than steak, or might have a similar amount, but how many lentils would you have to eat? It's just excessive, and it's no one's expecting anyone to eat that amount. So that's why you kind of have to structure your snacks and structure your meals accordingly, so that you can still hit your nutrient targets, so you do feel like you have energy and you do feel like you're going to progress with your diet. Because if your goal is obviously to be quite active and to improve your fitness, and if you listen to this podcast, you probably do some kind of exercise. So then if your goal is to do all those things, then you want to be able to perform in the gym. So then it's important as to the quality of food that you're getting.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess with that, like there's some combinations that are really good to get enough of those nutrients, especially amino acids, because typically the plant-based sources of protein aren't a complete protein, I think they say. So you need to have a combination. So for example, rice and lentils or rice and beans, and then you'll get the complete amount of amino acids you need to create enough protein for your body.
Exactly.
That's correct?
Yeah, exactly. So that's something we can go into more detail in future episodes. But for example, amino acids that are found your body can naturally produce, and there's some that are found completely from consuming animal products, and there are others that obviously if you just cut out all animal products altogether, then you're likely to miss out on these, and that's something that we can work on in future episodes and kind of go more into detail with these diets.
Yeah.
The positive sides of things, going back to that kind of stuff, with these kind of vegetarian and vegan diets, especially vegetarian, we see that there's lots and lots of studies that talk about how vegetarian diets are more likely to have reduced or improved health outcomes. So that's reduction in hypertension or reduced high blood pressure, and also cancer-related diseases.
Yep.
Diet-related cancers reduces in them, and then you've also got reduction in cardiovascular disease. So in general, there's a lot of improved heart health from focusing on vegetarian diet, purely because you're likely to be consuming less cholesterol and less animal fats, which are a lot more difficult to be broken down and can be stored in your arteries. And if we just look at, it depends on what kind of diet the person was previously on, but our goal as coaches and as trainers is obviously, we'll work with whatever the client wants to, try and focus on. If they want to choose a vegan diet or for ethical reasons, we'll work with them. But we always encourage people to have a wide range of foods and to limit the amount of, limiting or restricting and missing out on food groups as such.
Yeah.
So we want to try and incorporate as many food groups as possible, or as much as the person is willing to put into their diet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's one of the main reasons I chose to sort of go vegetarian in the first place was for heart health and the benefits related around that. There's also benefits for reducing the risk of diabetes and obesity. So, and I think there's a lot of other things as well, like you said, some cancers. So there are definitely a lot of benefits, and especially if you're eating less of the processed foods. So if you're eating more of those plant-based foods, then you're going to do a lot better anyways. There's I'm reading this book at the moment called Ikigai, and it talks about the blue zones in the earth, and there's basically 5 blue zones, and that talks about the diets that these people in the blue zones eat. And these people in the blue zones around the world, basically they live the longest in the world. They're really healthy. They've got a really high proportion of people who are in their hundreds and living really full and healthy lives. And they talk a little bit about how their diet is helping them to achieve that. Not only their diet, but other things too. And a lot of them are, I would probably say pescatarian if we're putting a label on it, but they eat mostly plants. They don't have processed foods. They have beans, legumes, grains such as rice. They have their nuts, their fresh fruit, their vegetables. They have a little bit of fish a couple of times a week, and they sort of eat lower amounts of meat. So definitely there are benefits. I'm not saying that, if everyone who goes on these diets are going to live to over 100, but yeah, there are definitely health benefits for vegetarian, vegan and pescatarian diets.
Exactly. And as Steph mentioned, so with living longer, something that we're going to get through. So at the moment we've got book club, which is Atomic Habits, but in the future, obviously one of our episodes will be on Eat Like the Animals. And so in that book, David talks about how there's 2 main pathways. One's for reproduction and one is for longevity of life. And we see that a lower protein diet, which is seen in those Okinawa people that's in Japan.
They're in the blue zone.
Yeah. So those people live quite a long time because their diet has a little bit lower percentage of protein, so it's slightly less than 20%, whereas something higher like 25% has a little bit shorter life expectancy, but way better for reproduction. So they gave an example of the study, and they had some blowflies, and they said they could replicate this because blowflies, they can actually go through their entire lifespan quite easily, like within about 40 days.
Okay.
And so those flies that were on the low protein diet lived to 40 days, but they had really small balls. but the flies that had a really high protein diet had really big balls
and didn't live as long.
They didn't live as long, but they reproduced.
Yeah,
so they were able to be more fertile. So it's pretty much like protein is the growth pathway. So increasing your intake of protein increases the growth of cells, which is I guess they're trying to say, increase protein intake, increase risk of, excessively increased risk of maybe potential cancer risk and increased risk of lots of other things. But obviously we see if an excessive protein diet or excessively high, well, it's likely to probably because of increased amounts of animal fats and stuff like that. So that's not necessarily a good thing. So once again, we're in the middle of the road. We're not promoting, I'm not promoting either. We're pretty much promoting, a really good balance of all the food groups. And that way there you can, you're not going to have a awful relationship with food. You're going to have a good relationship with food where you can look at things objectively. And if you need to eat something that's not necessarily, if you can be mostly plant-based and you do have something that's meat or something that's an animal product, you're psychologically you're going to be okay with that. And that's another big thing that comes with people's relationship with food. And often, choosing some of these diets can be just another way for you to be okay with restrictive eating, which is something that we're obviously, trying to get people away from and out of those food labels.
Out of that diet mindset.
Yeah, exactly. So you want something that's long-term and sustainable.
Yeah, for sure. This was a great chat. This is a good episode. I enjoyed it. Sort of took a little bit of an adventure that I didn't expect, but I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Yeah. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Like I said before, Atomic Habits is our next book club or book episode. So hopefully you guys are working through either the audio book or the hard copy. I'm a big advocate for the hard copy, but if you don't have time and you are driving lots or you're in the car or you go for a walk, you can listen to the audio book. You'll probably get lots out of it as well. I'm pretty sure one of the listeners was listening to it and at the moment and saying how, they're giving lots of little references. Go to the website here or do follow up with all these things so you can kind of get some resources from it that you may not necessarily get from the hard copy as well. So there are benefits to both, but that's for book club. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode and we will see you next week.